All right, everybody, welcome to the fifth episode of Today's Collector, a series leading up to the Mint Collective, where we highlight different approaches to the hobby and curating a personal collection. My name is Jeremy Lee. I'm the host of Sports Cards Live and Collectible Live as well. Today's guest on the show needs no introduction, as his name is synonymous with collecting sports cards. Let's bring him out. Dr. James Beckett, welcome to Today's Collector. How have you been keeping, sir?
Great, Jeremy. Good to see you.
It's great to see you as well, Jim. I wanted to bring you on to Today's Collector because you have decades of experience communicating with hobbyists, providing information to collectors, but most importantly, you're a collector yourself, and I wanted to bring your insights and your advice to the Mint Collective audience. So with that, I want to ask you first, what was your approach? What was your strategy, your focus when you started building your own personal collection?
When I'm talking to people, sometimes I want to say, you should just do whatever you want to do. But when I started, I basically did what everybody else did. When I was a new collector in my, not when I was a kid, but when I was an adult and I was in grad school and getting out of grad school, the norm there was to complete sets. So I get all the Topps cards, get all the Bowman cards, get all the play balls, the Goudeys, the Leafs, um, everything kind of 1933 up to kind of the present of the 70s in those days. And that's just what everybody did. There weren't, that's just what you did. And so I enjoyed that. It's easy to keep score. You either got a complete set or you don't. And the guys would bat around what they were working on. And there was kind of a pecking order of collectors based on what you had and what you needed. It was great.
It was a simpler time back then. There was one or two sets each year, even into the 80s. In the early 80s, you had Donruss and Fleer come onto the scene along with Topps. So yeah, most of us, and I was collecting in the 80s, we put our set together. Would you say back then, were there rookie card collectors? Were there Hall of Fame collectors? Were there team collectors? Were there those other sorts of approaches as well that were prominent?
Those were always there, but they weren't as prominent. They weren't as prominent. Again, the internet and the digital space has really allowed for a lot of that. But I'm really talking about the 70s. In the 70s, there really weren't. It just was Topps, and so there really was. It was dismissive to even worry about this year's set of the advanced collectors. It was mainly a hobby of nostalgia and working your way back. And so, but again, with just one Topps set, you could buy it for there were these mail order dealers that would send you one for $15. I got my 72 set for $15. 72 Topps baseball. So
That's a good buy.
A decent buy. Should have bought a couple more.
No
But that wasn't, not that wasn't kosher, but you didn't think about hoarding. You were busy trying to, okay, I got that, but I'm really working my way back. I'm working on the 48 leaf SPs.
Yeah. It was really about building that set, and then you would just wait for the next year to come around when Topps or whoever.
There was in the 70s. You didn't wait for the next year. It wasn't about that. That was a different. That was the marketing of Topps. But the advanced collectors that hit the show circuit, of which I was one, there was no consideration of the very little consideration. It was the hot dog cards, the regionals. And maybe expanding into some of the other sports besides baseball. But in the 80s, yes, all of a sudden there was a lot more marketing of this year's cards and choices among the new entrants. And that actually brought an exciting dynamic element to it and brought the hobby into the present, because it was a bunch of old guys in the 70s.
Right. Yeah. Well, so one of the things I want to get out of you here today, and really to the benefit of the viewers and some may be newer to the hobby, is really understanding what a veteran collector has experienced and maybe trying to shorten the learning curve for some new people coming in. So with that, I want to ask you, would you say that there are different stages of a collector's journey as we advance through life? They say that they say in modern times, a person will have 3 to 5 different careers, let's say. Is there a parallel to how many times collectors may change their focus throughout their hobby career?
Well, that whatever that number is, whether it's 3 to 5, I've heard 5 to 7. I think it's increasing. It's increased in our lifetime, certainly in my lifetime. And so it's normal. I think it's even healthy. And so if you're collecting the same way in your 50s that you were in your 20s, that's okay, but you don't have to. And the changes in the industry, and there's a technology that makes it available for you to do some things. I mean, almost, it was just card shows. You had to hit the big shows, and you had to know. And like I've said, in the old days, it wasn't even about the cash. It was about being able to trade. You had to have good trade material. The whole show was like a trade night. You had your cash, but they didn't want the cash. They wanted equivalent scarce cards.
So let me ask you this then, is there, again, you're somebody, you've been in the hobby for decades, and while we've seen change in the environment around us, the landscape in which the hobby resides, whether it's, you mentioned just card shows and even mail order back in the 70s to the internet and now all the different platforms there. Again, in speaking to newer type collectors, what is one or even a couple of constants that have been true to you with respect to building your collection throughout your hobby career?
I make a distinction between the chase and the hunt. The chase, if you're, it's not necessarily semantics, but basically nowadays, if you want a certain card, you can tell your friends you want that card, and they can look for it, or you can find it. But I like to hunt and be surprised. I like to buy a box of cards. I've rarely bought individual cards. I've mainly bought collections and a box of cards. And that's the hunt. The hunt is inside the box that I bought, not hunting through somebody's table to buy the one card. I'm always looking for a quantity discount. And that really, I'm kind of surprised at myself. That really hasn't changed. Back when I was completing all the sets, I did have to pick up some individual cards that I needed. But after that, I'm just being opportunistic. And so I think that allows me to not have dry spells and to enjoy each show or each interaction as a fresh start.
You mentioned that it allows you not to have dry spells. I find that fascinating because even myself, who's a 40-year, extremely passionate hobbyist, you know, I I'm a collector for life. Sports cards are a big part of my life. Collecting is a big part of my life, but you still can go through some emotional ups and downs as a participant in the hobby. And I'm going to ask, even yourself, you've been collecting for years. I'd assume you've had some ups and downs with respect to the level of passion you have for the hobby. If not, I'm happy to be wrong about that. But what advice would you give people who may be finding their collection or their approach to collecting to become stagnant?
Well, I've had different roles. So, I mean, of course, I've been in the hobby for these decades, but the first couple of decades, I was really a serious collector. First decade and a half, I guess. And then for a couple decades, I was a price guide guy. It was like it was the industry. I went for the hobby to the industry. And then the last 15 years or so, since I've sold the company, I've turned it back into a hobby for myself. And the ability to pivot, to go from hobby to industry to hobby, I can tell you right now, I enjoyed the hobby segments a lot more than the industry segment, where I was an executive. And I've said I kind of got kicked upstairs. I was in the hobby, I was in the thick of it, but I never got to touch the cards. I looked at the cards in the magazines. I mean, that's not the same as, I mean, it's almost like an NFT. You can't touch it. It's just there. It's a picture of it. No, I want to touch the cards. And I went many years with very little card contact. I was, meeting with my outstanding team, and they were out and about a lot. And but so that would have been, I wouldn't burn out. It was almost like I was, on the sidelines for a while. And so then now I'm chomping at the bit to get back in and to have a more well-rounded hobby experience where I can I can buy a little bit, sell a little bit, and hang out with some good friends.
So if anyone out there watching right now is feeling like, I've been in the hobby for say 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, 5 years, whatever it may be, and they're noticing the way the hobby moves lately, the market moves, the various types of cards, they're hot, they're not, players get hot, they get cold. If someone's disenchanted with the hobby right now, what advice would you give them to maybe get some of that passion back, to remain really invested in the hobby as a lifestyle more so than just a pastime?
Well, you've been in a long time, so have I. I mean, the things go up and things go down. They more go up than down, and owning something, whether it went up or down, is still the pleasure of owning something. And so if somebody's not ready for that, if they got into it for the wrong reasons, thinking this is a ticket to, I mean, that's what happened at the beginning of the junk wax era. This was a ticket to wealth, and they weren't touching the cards. They weren't even opening the cards. They were filling their garage with unopened products. So I'm a big fan of being involved with the cards and the people. And if you are, you can have a lifetime fabulous hobby. You're going to be with like-minded people, and whether it's sports or not sports, even you're dealing with subjects that you're interested in, and your friends are too. And it's complicated enough. I mean, I've been in a long time. You can't know everything, and accept that, but you can know more. And to me, and that's why I appreciate your podcast. You're allowing people to know, to understand and know more about the hobby. And to me, that's correlated with your enjoyment as well as the financial rewards. If you know what's going on, you're in the know and you're learning. So I don't think it's not luck. I mean, if you have a favorite player, hopefully it's a player that's going to do well. He's not going to get benched.
True. So if I were to summarize those comments, you mentioned the people, the relationships in the hobby. Go back to some collector friends, find some collector friends, do some networking in the hobby. That could be a way to get excited about the hobby again. You also mentioned always be learning. I think that's a great concept. If you find that you're stagnant in the hobby, you're not enjoying it this week as much as you were last week, or in 2022 as much as you were in 2021, find something to learn. And whether that's watching podcasts, reading books, looking at cards on various platforms, reading old Beckett magazines to see what the hot stories were back in the day. There's many ways that we can increase our level of knowledge in the hobby. And then finally, and you mentioned this earlier, you want to touch the cards. Go back to the cards that you have. We always find, I speak for myself, I always find, and I do hear other people say that, there is that chase. We're always on the hunt for the next card. We buy cards, we receive them, and then we're on to the next card. I think, and would you agree with this, Jim, that it's worthwhile every so often? For me, it's every couple of months. I'll go through a different box or binder of cards, look at them and enjoy them. I will consume them that way. And I find it very enjoyable. Going back to the cards, I think is a great way to get back into the hobby if you ever do find yourself becoming stagnant. Does that resonate with you?
True disclosure, I think I spend an hour a day at least looking at a different box of cards. So I have more than 365 boxes of cards of various sizes. And so I'm rotationally going through, and it's a kick. It's a kick. But in the knowledge thing, it can be overwhelming if you got to try to go too broadly. That's why people that specialize in just hockey, that they love hockey, or basketball is even a smaller rosters, that they can master it or get close to mastery more easily than some other things. So, do something that you can get a handle on, and then go deep with what you love. Yeah.
Go deep with what you, yeah, no, that makes good sense to me. So that's a good segue into the next question I have for you, which is around, there are many approaches to curating a personal collection, from player collecting to team collecting, set building, as we mentioned earlier, and many more, of course. Is there a particular approach that you think is either underutilized or overlooked in the hobby these days that may bring joy to a new collector who may not be aware of it? A lot of new collectors, the first question that people ask somebody when they meet them in the hobby is, who do you collect? And I always say, that's not the question. It's not who do you collect, it's what do you collect? Because there are so many different approaches to this hobby. They are not all player focused. So to circle back to the question, is there an overlooked or underutilized approach that you think people should have in mind when they are growing themselves within the hobby?
Well, as I said, my first segment in the hobby, I was strictly a set collector. So, I mean, I probably had some extra superstars and things like that for trade material, but I mainly was trying to complete sets. Now, and then I had not a hiatus, but I had that executive uh, time. And then coming out of that, I'm pretty much a player collector. Okay. But the way I do player collecting is very broad. I mean, even asking the question of who's your favorite player, I mean, it's Roberto Clemente, but I collect a lot of people just because I think that's fun. So my problem with a player collector, and it's okay if they want to do this, but when you only have one player that you're chasing, then that's to me that's too limiting. I mean, I think people ought to have a variety of players that they collect, and then they could, and some of them should be superstars, but maybe not all. I think that can be fun. Kyle, the wax museum guy, he's got his Indiana Pacer guys, and people are on the hunt for him. And it's Jeff Foster. Well, he doesn't have a lot of competition for Jeff Foster, but he gets a kick out of that. And to me, that's a legitimate way to enjoy the hobby, and not just the headline grabbing, biggest stars. So it's not wrong, but I like to have a broader list of players that I'm interested in.
Yeah, I think
And I encourage others to, because if you had all your eggs in the Zion Williamson basket and thought Ja was just Batman and Robin, and he's the Robin, and well, all of a sudden it looks like that flipped a while back, and maybe Zion will get back out there, but Ja looks like the real deal. And so making decisions that this is my guy, this is my only guy. I mean, I'd like to see people follow the sport and have more than one guy they collect. I think it's like diversification. You don't have to, but when I go to a show, I'm always I'm always going to see something I like. And if I was only looking for Roberto Clemente stuff that I didn't have, I'd be in and out of the show pretty quick sometimes. In fact, it might not even pay to go to shows. I would do the internet, and then it's just a question, and the auction houses, and it's just a question of, do I want to outbid the other guys, the other people?
right.
That's not the way I want a hobby.
I think you're right. Diversifying your approach to make from one player to multiple players, or to a player and a few sets.
Yeah,
It diversifies your
exactly.
enjoyment,
Yeah.
and it keeps you involved, and it keeps you hungry. And there's, like you said, if you're looking for one player, you're not going to have that much fun at a card show, especially if you already have most of their stuff.
Well, eventually you will. Eventually,
Yeah.
if you have enough money, you will. And it's like when I got all the sets that were the meaningful sets that everybody else had, you have to go into the regionals. And so, the hot dog cards, the Stahlmeyers, the Wilson Wieners, the Cons, Glendale Meats, all these different sets that are really tough. And that was the currency. Did you have any of those? First time I met Bill Mastro in the early 70s, all he cared about was, let's see, I had a very rare Cons Wiener that he didn't have. And he dared me. He said, "No way you have that, because I don't have that." And I said, "Well, Bill, I do have it, and I'll bring it to the next show." And so that's what was. So it was the rare cards, and I was thinking, and when you were asking me about this, I thought, back in the day, did I have the 100th best collection in the world? Did I have the 1,000th best collection in the world? probably something in between. But, when I went to these card shows, every dealer was a collector too and had all those same sets, but they didn't have all the regionals. They didn't have all the T206s and the Wagners and all that. And so the pecking order, again, even then was about quality more so than quantity. Nobody cared whether you had 10,000 cards or 100,000 cards. They wanted to know what your best cards were, and they wanted to see them, even if they weren't for sale.
Yeah. Okay. It's an interesting sort of history lesson how the hobby was back in those early days.
There's some parallels.
And this is before you even started the Beckett magazines, right?
Yes,
Because yeah,
yes.
so we're going back to the 70s and really early 80s there. So
Mainly 70s, yeah. My most aggressive buying decade was the 70s because that was before I did all this other price guide stuff.
right. That's awesome. Again, speaking about people would want to know who you collect. And again, I say it's not who do you collect, it's what do you collect. I personally have a few player collections,
Yeah.
various set collections, Hall of Fame players, different sports. I have about 40 different PCs within the overall PC, which allows me to always find something that I want. But if we're giving advice to people who are looking to get into the hobby as, for collecting, and they maybe you don't have a favorite team or a favorite player, there's one approach to the hobby that I come back to that people have told me is their approach. Because when I'm set up at a card show as a vendor, one of the first questions I ask anyone who comes to my booth that I've never met or seen before is, how do you approach the hobby?
Yeah.
And my favorite answer is, I just collect whatever catches my eye.
Yeah.
I love that answer. What do you think about that?
I like that. That's kind of what I would say too. But I mean, it's who do you collect? What do you collect? Better is how do you collect, which is kind of what you're saying. So I think there's any number of ways. But again, the hobby has gotten so sophisticated, and the dollar amounts have gotten so far up. There's now bragging rights. In the old days, the bragging rights were what a good deal you got on something, and now the bragging rights are, look how much I paid for this. It's completely flipped. Back in the day, you'd say, I get. Now, again, you weren't trying to steal it. I mean, you weren't being fraudulent or, but to get a good deal on something, but to do that, you had to know what a good deal was. So you had to know what the prevailing price was. My guess is when you go to a show, what can catch your eye is not just a beautiful card, but it's a card that's priced in a way that you think, hey, I'm going to buy this because I like the card, and I'm getting it at a price that I think is favorable. Not I'm overpaying for this because I really want it. But to do that, you have to have some years of experience and knowledge to say, I can tell this is a good deal. I understand the supply demand equilibrium here right now, not so much the historical pricing, but just you've been in it long enough to know a good deal when you see it. And that gives you an advantage.
Yeah.
And I have it too.
Yeah. Information is power, as they say. And the more you have, the better equipped you will be to know what a good deal is and maybe when to make an offer or counter offer, and where to really draw the line as to how much you're willing to pay for something and not go above that. If the rarer the card, the more flexible I think you need to be, because there may not be another opportunity to find a card like that. So you have to balance that out, right? You have to balance out your hardline approach with, maybe I should pay an extra 5 or 10% because this may be the last time I'm going to see a copy of this card in this condition for several years. You just never really know. I want to ask you this now, because we've been talking mostly about collecting, but there is a large segment of the hobby that invests in the hobby, and a lot of people, myself included, we're a hybrid. I often say that I'm an investor by consequence, because I've held cards for decades that have gone up in value from what would be an insignificant amount of money for me to a significant amount of money for me. So it's an investment because my option is to sell it and put that money into my household for the betterment of my family. Now I'm choosing to keep this value in cardboard because I love these cards and I'm into several of them for a good price. I raise this because I want to ask you, is there a main key distinction or change in focus that you need to adopt if you're going to go from collecting to investing in the hobby? And what do you see in your travels and in your history? What sort of characteristics of hobbyists do you see? What are the different characteristics or the different strategies and approaches that are utilized by someone who is a collector versus someone who is a investor?
I think if you're a collector, you've got some extra money and you're going to buy some cards and have fun with it. If you're an investor, you probably need to have some discipline. It needs to fit in with the rest of your investment portfolio. If you've got a big mortgage, uh, although mortgages are low interest rates now, but people should be not having credit card debt if they have a valuable portfolio of cards. They ought to take some chips off the table occasionally, and sell the stuff that they think is fully priced or that they can buy back later. That's yeah. I just once it becomes an investment, then it's an alternative investment, and most investment professionals are going to say if it's an alternative investment, 10% of your portfolio, 20% of your net worth, something like. And I think people just ignore that. If it's an investment, treat it as an investment, and you ought to be able to, with a straight face, tell your broker, your investment guy, that I'm not buying Krugerrands, I'm not buying gold. I've got tangible assets in my hockey card collection to the tune of whatever the valuation is. And then he or she can say, well, that fits. Okay, well then we don't need to do alternatives in your stock portfolio. We're going to go to the blue chip, basic, boring kinds of things that are solid, because cards are always going to be speculative. There's no sure thing. So I think the problem is, if you're an investor, they just don't have the same discipline, and they just think, I'm an investor, I'm riding it up. When in reality, there's usually a sell price when you buy any stock. You buy Apple or Google or Amazon. You could say, I'm just going to ride it forever, but most people don't. Most people take their profits, and certainly if they had high interest rate debt, they should take some money off and do that. So if you're going to say you're an investor, treat it like an investment.
I think that's great advice. Be disciplined and work it into your overall investment portfolio, not just
Same thing. If you've got a mentor or you got somebody, a wisdom figure in your life, run it by them. Say, hey, look, I've got X dollars worth of cards, and then here's how it fits in with the rest of my net worth. And the first thing the mentor might say is, are you serious? You have that many cards? But after the shock wears off and you can show that that's legit, then still somebody that can step back and say, okay, given that, and here's the prospects for that, but there's no sure things. Maybe you ought to rebalance your portfolio.
Yeah. Great advice. Great advice. All right. I'm going to ask you, what is some advice that you find yourself giving to experienced collectors in the hobby? And I ask that, like, when you're out, you're at card shows. I hear stories. People tell me they saw you at various shows, the Dallas show in particular, looking through the bins, enjoying yourself. I imagine people approach you, introduce themselves to you. So again, what advice do you give, and not just experience, what advice do you give experienced collectors, and what advice do you give a novice collector today in 2022 in the hobby?
Well, there's verbal advice, and then there's observational advice. I mean, basically, if they see me at a card show for some period of time, I'm sitting there at a dollar box. Now, I don't need the money. Maybe don't even need the cards, but I enjoy that. And so, regardless of what I would say, what I'm doing is showing that I can enjoy the hobby without six-figure cards that I'm, I don't know what I'd be doing. I guess I'd have to have some special case to put them in. But I don't want to deal with that. And I don't want to have. I'm buying things that no one's going to steal. No one's going to steal. And if they want to look through them, they'll say, well, there's some Dallas Cowboys in there, some Mavericks, some Rangers, some local guys, and some other eclectic kind of stuff. And it's like you said, it's just what catches my eye. But if it's a $5 card that's available in the dollar box, I'm liable to pick it up. But 10 other people passed it by because it was just a dollar card to them.
Right.
But
Yeah.
so I'm giving permission, I think, implicitly for people to say, hey, any way you want to collect is good. You don't have to compete. Like I said, I don't think I was in the top 100 collectors in the country. When I went to the card shows, I had a serious collection. I was respected. This is all before I was doing the price guide stuff. That's how I knew what stuff was worth, and I knew who to ask because I was a regular. But there were 100 guys that had better collections than I did. But I'm not thinking, oh, poor me. No, I loved it. And
So,
occasionally, like I said, with Mastro and some others that were very advanced, Robert Lifson back in the day, when you had something they wanted, and that's why they went on to be auction guys, because they had a great eye.
mhm.
Barry Halper, if I had something he wanted, it's Frank Nagy. There were these icons. I'd occasionally have something they wanted. And that was fun. And I didn't hold them hostage or anything. It was just fun. Just a bunch of guys getting together and trading and talking cards.
Hobby icons. So if
Yeah.
there's something I'm going to take away from that, it's that for people who are coming to the hobby in 2021, 2022, and you might be coming in because you're noticing that there is value, there is investment value. These are tangible alternative assets, truly assets. At the end of the day, there needs to be, I believe, collectors willing to hold these cards when you are going to be ready to dispose of them, whether you're an investor or a collector. And it's interesting that Dr. Beckett here, Jim Beckett, somebody who has been at the forefront of the hobby going on 40 years now, with the price guides, with BGS grading, Beckett Grading Services, and more, the marketplace for his old company. He's a collector still, and he's picking through dollar bins at times looking for cards that make him happy. I love when you said, Jim, you might not even need these cards, but you can't help yourself. You're a collector.
Nobody needs cards.
Nobody needs cards.
Yeah.
But you're a collector, and at the end of the day, all these values that we're seeing in the hobby right now, I believe, are greatly dependent on there being collectors who want them, because otherwise it's just a game of hot potato, and you're just moving these assets around from investor to investor. But there has to be a reason why we love these things.
Well, I've moved some of my cards to other investors by going through a dollar box. And like I said, I'm picking out anything I see that's $5. If it's a $5 card, I'm going to buy it for $1. Okay. However, and again, this is experience, observational now, although I don't show people exactly what I get, but there's a little stack of cards after every show that I made a mistake on. That not only are they not worth $5, they're not worth $1. In fact, I wound up selling them on eBay for 10 cents each. I group them up into player lots. And so I took a loss. Now, on balance, I certainly did. I wouldn't keep doing it if I wasn't winning a lot more than I was losing. But it's funny. But I'm not throwing them in the trash. I'm just saying, you know what, I'm going to find a place and I'd like to sell them for $0.25, but that would take a long time. I'd have to have my own quarter box, and then but on eBay I can group 100 of them for $10 of some player that I thought or some group that has some cohesion. So
move them along, let them find a new good home.
Nobody's perfect, and at a dollar box or something like that, I'm not going to have any stress about over picking.
Right.
Whereas if I were seriously collecting like I did in the 70s and buying expensive stuff, I'd be pouring over all the comps, and I'd be going a lot slower, and I wouldn't enjoy it as much. For me.
Yeah. No, fair, very fair. Okay. Well, this has been great. I've enjoyed this. I think we've brought some great value to to the viewers of this episode, and you've shared a lot of wisdom based on your vast experience. So I want to thank you for that. Before we end the episode, though, Jim, will you be attending the Mint Collective in Las Vegas at the end of March?
I believe so. I'm working on my arrangements as we speak.
Okay, great. And if you're working on your arrangements, if the planning goes well, what are you most looking forward to at the show, at the event?
I think, like I said, it's about the people and the cards. And I don't think I'm going to see a lot of cards there. I think there's a card show there, but I don't think that's the draw. And as far as the people, I always think about old friends and new friends. I think the Mint Collective is going to be more new friends. I think it's going to be a new audience, and I'm looking forward to that. So that's going to be my mindset. I'll certainly see some people that I've known for. And by the way, Jeremy, it's been 50 years, but who's counting? So you're not trying to out me into my 70s,
no, I wasn't.
But yeah, no, so I think that's going to be the tone and the setup for the Mint Collective. I'm really looking forward to it. I think the appeal that they're making is to. I think it sounds really interesting to me. The crowd they're going to gather, and I'm looking forward to influencing some of those influencers. And some are influencers like you that are content creators, but that's content creating with a microphone. There's also content creators that are these mega, huge collectors that are content creating by the decisions they're making on buying and selling, and really bringing a lot of energy and attention to our hobby.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm looking forward to it. We'll get to meet. We'll see each other again in person. We had the pleasure of meeting in person for the first time at the National this past year, but look forward to seeing you at the Mint Collective again. Dr. Beckett, thank you for joining today's Collector. It's been a pleasure to speak with you again. So we're going to end this. Thanks again. You hang tight right there for one moment. Everybody, thanks for tuning in to the episode. Have a great week ahead, and look forward to seeing and meeting everybody at the Mint Collective March 25th to 27th in Las Vegas. Have a great rest of your day.